Hi, I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Theresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. We're here to talk about all things student empowerment in music education. Before we introduce today's guest, we want to remind you to follow or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.
In addition, if you like what you hear today, please consider leaving a rating or review. That's what helps podcasts like Pass the Baton grow.
Well, today was another great, I will say, Google find, right?
Yes.
Finding on the NAFME blog, Dr. Tina Huynh. She was just fantastic. I really enjoyed the conversation and just the ideas and how she presented what she was doing with the students in these games.
Yeah, she provided some great resources that I'm interested in looking into. Got to check out her website. But she really inspired me when she was talking about her games that she created with, or her students created with in their class. Made me think I might need to do that in my classroom. So.
All right, welcome back. We are really excited today to be joined by Dr. Tina Huynh. I found Tina actually through a Google search, really. I was looking through some articles online, and there was one on the NAFME blog that you had shared about student-centered learning through game creation. And it was just like, ooh, this looks really interesting. And sure enough, it was a great article. And we're glad to have you here. So hi, Tina. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me, Theresa and Kathryn. It's so lovely to be here with you today.
Of course. So before we kind of dive into the content here, can you maybe tell us about your background, what you're teaching now, things like that?
Sure. Currently, I am an assistant professor of music education. I'm at the University of Puget Sound, which is in Tacoma, Washington, about 40 minutes south of Seattle. And I teach music education courses to undergraduates and graduates. We have an MAT program here, Master of Arts in Teaching program, that is framed through social justice and anti-racist teaching. And I also teach some other courses like music of the Vietnamese diaspora, our general Music 100 appreciation class. Some of the distinctive classes that I have here are popular music pedagogies, for instance. So I'm very much enjoying my time here. It's a small liberal arts college, and we have some wonderful music majors and music ed majors. And previous to this, I was teaching in elementary general music, and it was mostly K through 5. I'm originally from Southern California, was born and raised there. And so I taught down in the Southern California area, it was more like suburbs. And then when I moved to Los Angeles to do my master's and doctoral work, I taught in the LAUSD schools, public and private, through outreach programs, and as a freelancer as well, all mostly elementary music.
Yeah. That's awesome. You're talking my language, which is great. So I know we're going to talk about maybe a little bit about your article that you wrote, but why the interest in student-centered learning? Where did that come from for you?
Sure. When I was teaching in the suburbs, I was fresh out of college, so I had been taught a certain way, and so I just took with me what I learned and applied it to my students. And as the years went by, I learned more, of course, and got to explore more teaching strategies and methodologies. I was teaching the style of Kodai, that my teaching was heavily influenced by that, and still is in certain ways. And when I moved to the city, I noticed that what I was doing wasn't working well for the students in the city. And I think I very quickly realized that I had to teach to the students. And whatever worked before didn't really quite work always. The song choices, the methods that I was doing, and so when I was in the city, I would experiment more not just because I had to, but also because I was in graduate school. And so I was asked to reflect deeply on my teaching and through these new readings and discussions, I thought of different ways to reach students, and that really helped.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds like really perfect timing then. If you were, you were noticing something in your students that needed to be different, and you were also, having those opportunities through graduate school. That's great. And I think that's what we have to think about always, is like the students, it's student-centered learning for a reason, right? The fact that the students need to be the focus of what we're doing. And that might be different than our own backgrounds, than what we learned in college and things like that. But
yeah.
they come
And
first.
I wondered too, like when you were saying those things, I'm starting to see some of that in my teaching this year as well, because we had this COVID situation and we had this break and we're coming back and no one's the same, right? Like we're all kind of relearning how to be together and all those things. So I feel like that what you're talking about is just so timely too, in just maybe many people's situations right now, that the classroom has been so different for the last few years. So.
Yes, we just have to respond to the students and their needs, right? And also their desires, but their needs for sure.
So, okay, so you've got this interest in student-centered learning. You're kind of looking at your students. You're thinking about like what their needs are, what their interests are, all of those things. Then where did the games come from?
Yeah, so that was I would say as I got further and further into experimentation, I think that was probably one of the most experimental moments in my teaching with the younger ones. And actually, that was also one of the last years that I was teaching elementary, and then I went into university teaching college level students. But I came upon that through the idea of what if we had this situation in the classroom where it wasn't like students are sitting in chairs and having direct instruction from me, and there are, it's a very structured learning setting. But maybe if we had a situation where it was more like a living room and we were playing games, and it would be more relaxed and the students could do whatever they want with music. Really take ownership of what they learned. So instead of me just constantly telling them, you're going to learn this, and then you're going to learn this, and then I'm going to test you, I thought, okay, well, why don't I see what they can do? And then I'll figure out how well they know the content that I've taught them throughout these last few years. This particular set of students I had since kindergarten, and at this point they were in 5th grade, so I'd had them for a long time. They were all familiar with each other, so there was almost a sibling-like relationship among them anyway. It's a smaller class, 16 students. And with 16, I know that I've taught many types of situations. I've had 90 students before. But in this particular situation, I thought, okay, this might work because the students know each other, they're comfortable with each other. We have a classroom space in which we could divide. There was enough space to divide the room up and have them work in groups. And so I divided them up into 4 groups, and I had them create their own games. And I think that when I talk about student-centered learning through game creation, some people automatically think gamification. And it's not necessarily gamification. I think that when we talk about gamification, we talk about teachers making music or whatever subject area into a game-like instance, right? So the teacher's actually creating the game. But in this case, the students are creating the games. So they are actually the ones, I suppose, making the gamification. But so I set up some supports for them. I said each group is going to have one musical element that they need to focus on, that their game is going to be centered around. So one group will be centered around melody, and you can do whatever you want with melody, but the game needs to be centered around melody, and the player needs to be able to, at some point, will need to sing or play a melody, somehow show that they know what a melody is and that they can play it. And then the second group is rhythm, so kind of similar thing. And the third group was texture And the fourth group was, geez, I can't remember now, but I think it was like, I'll remember in a moment, I'm sure. So they each got together and I gave them 4 weeks. And over the 4 weeks, the first week I had them set up the rules. So what is the game going to be? What are the rules? And then you're going to give me a piece of paper at the end of the period that says the name of the game, the rules, what materials you need, and how you think you're going to play it, and how do people win, right? How do you get to the end, or how does the game end? And this is all based on this book that I came across during my time in my graduate schooling, which was by Jane McGonigal, and it's called Reality is Broken. The games, it was something about games, but the whole book was about games and the rules that make up games. So, I kind of went down the rabbit hole with that and became inspired. And so that was also part of the whole time, how it all came together, is that this idea came through the book. So I have her to thank. But then the second week, I had time to see what materials the students wanted. So I collected those materials for them, or I would ask them, okay, do you think you can find this material at home? Maybe it might be a spinner and they wanted to create their own spinner and they need a little tiny little, pin for that. And so there was one of them, one of the teams needed Velcro. I said, okay, do you think you can find Velcro, or do you want me to find Velcro, right? And so then the game building started in the second week. I gave them each whatever they needed. Some of them, actually most of them, wanted a poster board. So they immediately thought of a board game. And one group, the rhythm group, actually, instead of using a physical game board, they created one on, at the time on Google, there was an app that it's just blank and you can do whatever you want with it. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was just a blank white sheet of paper basically, but online. And so they could create shapes and do all sorts of things. And I think now that might have been replaced by the Jamboard, because you can things like that. But they created their own game board on the computer and they projected it on the smart board, which we had at the time. And then they also had, we were using Music First Junior, and they were creating rhythms on that through one of the apps on there. And so they would play the rhythm, and then the player had to guess what meter it was by what they had created. So they were composing these rhythms with this app, and then they were, having the students or the players, play this game. So it was really interesting. And these kind of ideas I would never have thought myself. So I really enjoyed learning from them and seeing what they came up with. And so this moment was a huge moment of creative thinking for them. And I think when we think about creativity in music, we often think of improvisation, we think of composition. But this is creative thinking that can include improvisation and composition, and which it did. But it was really the game creation itself, that was the creative act. And then within that, there were other creative acts.
Yeah. And I think I can imagine that in my classroom too, that like they probably came up with ideas. I remember one group I've had where they wanted to do rhythms, but they wanted to use boom whackers. And so we had to kind of talk about, okay, but there's pitch in boom whackers, you know what I mean? But that helped me see some holes in their thinking, or also sometimes I think I had to learn to step back and let them try that, and then have them stumble upon their new problem of, oh wait, whoops, is this making a rhythm? I mean, this is more also making a melody,
Yes.
Yeah.
And these issues that come up that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, because as teachers, sometimes we design things, we curate them, and we scaffold them so carefully because we are the experts, right? But sometimes when the students do it, they come across these issues, and it's very useful for us to solve those problems. But it's also useful for us to see those gaps that we actually didn't see ourselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We just didn't realize like, oh yeah, we missed talking about, pitch or whatever it is, Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So I loved in your article, I think I felt like you in the paragraph about like the benefits from the students, like what came of this, but can you share with us a little bit about like what were the benefits that you saw when you kind of shifted towards this game creation with them?
Sure. One of the things that well, there were many things in different levels, right? Musical and also non-musical, like social, personal, social, emotional. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the musical things that I noticed from the students is that they saw music as an act that was part of everyday life, and that was not just within the classroom, within the specific set of rules and parameters, that you only do music inside the class and it must be this way and we must do this, right? But it was like, oh, now we can make games out of music, and
Mm-hmm.
you can do this at home, because I wanted them to have that feeling of like being in the living room, not being in the classroom. So um, indirectly showing them that they can do music anywhere in any way. And
Mm-hmm.
we know that naturally students will make up musical games on the playground, for instance. But how can we hone that to make it into not just a creative act on the playground, but also help them, synthesize kind of all of their knowledge and create something that's more complex, that is also really exciting and very useful as
Yeah.
well. And so those are the musical things I was thinking about. The social parts of that was really interesting, because we had students who had known each other for so long, students who were best friends, and then then you have the I want to do this, no, I want to do this, so they had to figure out how to solve those conflicts and how to compromise, how
Mm-hmm.
to be a team, and you can also see the natural leaders who come out who are going to be, I have this great idea and let's do it this way. And you can see the students who are easygoing are going to be following that. And
Mm-hmm.
other students who are like, no, I don't know, that's not, I want to do something else. So how do you solve those conflicts? But it was nice because you create conflict within the class, but it's around the content. And there's a way that you can moderate that and have them talk to each other and figure out what's the best way, right, to come to an agreement. So in a way, it's, teaching them how to get along with each other as well.
Yeah, I feel like there was such a strong purpose of we want to create this game. People are counting on us to come up with a product so that others can play. So we want to figure out this conflict because we want to have a good product. Like I feel like all of it kind of makes this perfect storm of helping students want to work through, persevere, right? Because they want, they have a strong meaning and they're, strong, what am I trying to say? That like they're I'm losing my words, but they're right. They're really invested. That's what I wanted to say, that they're really invested in it to figure it out, even when
Yeah.
it gets hard,
Yes, I wanted to have a fun game. And I think that was probably one of the things I said, is that the game needs to be fun.
Yeah.
Of course, that's a given, but sometimes when they're making up rules, they would have consequences. So if you don't get the answer right, then you have to go back 3 spots, right? Or one of those teams suggested, if you don't get the answer right, you've got to do 10 push-ups. And I was like, really fun. So getting them to understand like the difference between like punitive and like taking a step back within the game, right? So what is a little bit too much and what's appropriate for playing a game, make it still fun.
Yeah. I also feel like that's is great for like the empathy piece too, of like, think about the user, right? We're creating something, but we have to think about our audience. And that's a great thing to be learning as well.
Yeah.
So going back a few minutes, I really liked that you explain the difference between gamification and creating a game, because sometimes I think that word gamification gets thrown out and oh yeah, gamification, we played a game today. They're not the same. So I thank you for making that distinction. But I also really liked how you talked about the scaffolding process. It wasn't you have 4 weeks to make a game. see you at the end. We have 4 weeks. First week, here's what you need to come up with. And I think that was really great to be able to work them through that process. Sometimes I think it's easy to come up with these great projects and just throw it to the kids. And then they end up spending the first 3 weeks thinking and talking about it. And then the last week scrambling to make a project. So I appreciate that. Did you find that was helpful for the students, and were they able to like make tweaks along the way, or how did the process go?
Yes, it really helped them to have a timeline. Like, you have to have this in by this date. And so they were, sometimes they were struggling to get that in at the end. But they still had then 3 weeks to work on the next step. So, it worked out very well as far as the timing. It does take a long time though, because, I dedicated it was January. So I dedicated the whole month of January to that. But I would say I don't regret it. They didn't prepare for a concert or anything, but that's also why I chose January, because we often choose kind of extra activities during that January month before the festivals and before the spring concerts happen. And I should mention also that at the end of that unit, we also had a week dedicated to reflection. And I think that's something, what went well, and what would you do again? What would you do again? What would you fix if you could do it again, right? What would you change next time? So they had this big reflective session. And that went really well too, because they also not only did they talk about the game itself and how they would change this or do that, they also talked about their interpersonal skills. Well, we should have got along better because that took us a really long time to come to this conclusion, I should have said sorry earlier or whatever it might be. Yeah. So that was really interesting to have. It was truly holistic, that the music content and learning really blended well with the social emotional aspect and like the development of interpersonal skills. The reflective piece, I think, is often missing, because when we're out of time, we're like, oh, we're out of time. Okay, see you next week, right? Or see you tomorrow. And we forget to build in time. And I think that's, that happens more often with the novice teachers, right? As we're trying to figure out our time organization. But it also happens to veteran teachers, when you really get into something, it kind of happens to everyone. You're just going to have to keep your eye on the clock. And so to intentionally build in this reflective time, and it wasn't just like the last 5 minutes of class, right? It was the next class, and let's really sit and think about it, because you did this thing for 4 weeks, like what went well, what didn't go so well.
Did the students have a chance to play the games?
Yes, they did. So that was the last week. They did all play their games, and that was a whole goal, right? For everybody to play each other's games. Yeah.
Good. So if somebody listening is thinking like, this sounds like a really cool idea, what could they try? How would you suggest someone get started, or what's something that they could try in their own classrooms?
I would suggest to first try it out with the whole class and walk through it together. So it might be, all right, today we're going to create a game together. Let's think about what we need when we're creating a game. First, you need rules. Second, you need materials. Third, you need, a system, like how the game works and how to get to the end, right? So kind of talking about the mechanics of the game together. And then I would say, let's build the rules together. And then we can be democratic about it and vote or whatever it might be. Do you want to do a board game? Do you want to do something that you create online? So many different ways to do that. So I think there would be many ideas. And then the students can kind of choose what they want to do, and the teacher can go with that. But I would say also a little bit at a time too, maybe 5 or 10 minutes on discussion about it, and then it gives the teacher time to really think about, okay, how can I flesh this out and make it a really good experience for my students, because it's so open, right? There's no rules or guidelines. I mean, if the student says, I want to do this, and then you're like, I don't know what to do here, then you say, okay, that's a great idea, we'll talk more tomorrow, and it gives you some time to do that, right? Or if they say, I want to do this, and you're thinking, oh, I have all sorts of ideas of how we can go across this. Then it gives you the opportunity to kind of brainstorm with the students more. But I would suggest doing it as a full class first before splitting off and having all the students do their own thing, because sometimes that there can be a lot of questions and confusion. And I think also if a teacher hasn't done that before, it can get confusing for the teacher as well.
Mm.
4 groups want to do 4 different things, and suddenly you've got a lot to manage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A great
I do
idea.
want to say too, though, I noticed you said a lot earlier, you picked a class where it seems like when you first started this, because it was something maybe you hadn't done before, like you found a situation where you thought, I probably can, this is a good class to start this with. It was a smaller than typical class, etc. So like I do think sometimes we go immediately to, but I have 4 5th grades that are huge classes. Like, well, okay, well then maybe pick one of those, or pick a different grade level that has, pick something that you think is going to be manageable for yourself when you're trying something.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And also, there are certain ways that you can control the situation as the teacher, depending on your level of comfortability. I mean, you could choose anything, right? I happen to choose the musical elements. But you could also have students choose a song, for instance, just like one song that they happen to be singing in class. Let's build a game around that. How would we do that? That's another option. Instead of giving the song and then we're going to play a game and hear, all of our folk songs that we know and the dances and all those things that we always that are in our bag of tricks, right? Maybe we can create something new with the students with a song that exists. So that's another way to, I think, for the teacher to have a guide themselves, something to lean on, right? Rather than just like open and free and do whatever kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that idea. It just makes it feel very manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's something we always ask our guests this season, which is how do you build relationships with your students? Because I think I mentioned that you said you also want to pick a class where you feel like there's a culture there that's going to be ready to tackle some of these tasks. So how do you build relationships with students?
Yes, there are many ways that I build relationships with students, from speaking to them, giving them time in class to speak about themselves and their interests, to talking to them outside of class. I used to have supervision, so I'd just be out there and during recess or lunch, and the students would come up to me and we'd just start chatting. Those are special moments, actually. Those are really nice moments to be outside of the class and outside of the music room, and you're not talking about music, but you're just the students will come up and they'll just start talking about their lives, right? And so those are special moments. Also learning from the parents as well, because sometimes the parents will tell you special things about their kids that the kids won't think to tell you. Oh, my kid is my child is in musical theater. Oh, well, I didn't know that. Well, now I can really right, use this information and use it to enhance the classroom and really tailor some things to the student because I know more about them. One parent told me, "Oh, my child has a drum set. He's been taking drumming lessons for 2 years, and I had no idea because I didn't know to ask." Right? I mean. But then once I found out, I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. So at one point, the parent got a new drum set for their child. And so she donated the old drum set to our classroom. And so this opens up a lot of possibilities right now. We have a drum set that was gifted to us, and that was amazing. And so we could do so many things with that. So we ended up writing a pop song together as a class.
Fun. So fun.
Yeah, we've just found that without the relationship, so much of what we try to do to give the students ownership and to empower them, it just can't happen.
Yeah.
And
then there are the more formal ways of getting to know the students, like let's fill out a survey. What are your favorite things to do? And that's fine too. With my college students, I recently did something that I learned from a professional development session at our local public school district. And it was writing a poem about oneself. So you list a bunch of things that are important to you or that identify with you. And then in front of it, you write, I am. So actually, I have one right here, and can I read it to you?
Yeah.
All right. So here is the poem that my student wrote. I am a student. I am a good listener. I am riding roller coasters with my dad. I am playing a cello duet with my childhood best friend. I am pursuing my dream career. I am showing everyone genuine kindness. I am maintaining my friendships. I am improving my musical skills. I am stability in life.
That's beautiful.
And so each line that I had them write, I said, okay, first you tell me who you identify as, giving me two things, right? Then the next one was, think about special moments in your life that you remember, maybe from your childhood. Then it was, what do you work hard at? Right now, what you work hard at. And then the last one was, what do you aspire to? So then it tells me a little bit about what they're thinking, right? And you see the little musical piece there and what they're feeling about music and their careers as becoming music teachers, but you also see these memories that are precious. Also, you get to see who they see themselves as, and you kind of really get to know this person in a deeper kind of inner level, rather than just, the student and who are you writing your lesson plans properly, So
Oh, I really like that. And what a neat way to frame it. So you're not saying, okay, write a poem about yourself.
Right.
You instead ask those questions and then just inserted that phrase. That's perfect.
It was a great idea. And I have to say, give all my credit to Tacoma Public School District who offered this professional development. It's actually a joint professional development that we have with our university and them. And together we do activities and talk about ways to be culturally responsive in our teaching.
Wow. I love it. That's really great. Okay. Well, with all of that, so if people want to learn more about you and your work and all of that good stuff, how could they connect with you?
Sure. I have a website. It's tinaahuyn.com, tinaahuyn.com, tinaahuyn.com. And there people can find out the research that I have done, that I'm working on, the community work I've done. I'm also a filmmaker, so they can find out about the films that I have been working on. I'm also in the process of publishing a couple of books, and so those are on there as well. And they can contact me there directly through email as well on that website.
Okay, great. We'll make sure that we put that link into the notes so people can get right to it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciated this. Just so many great ideas between the games and then the poem, which I'm like already thinking about how I can implement that.
Me too.
But everything has been great. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Theresa. Thank you, Kathryn.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
We'd also love for you to consider sharing this podcast with a friend and leaving a positive review. That's one of the best ways to get this message to new listeners.